Okay, let's just head over here. Over here. All right, so I think we're heading off to a little bit better start this Sunday than we did last week. So maybe just a way to make things a little bit easier is, rather than everyone diving in from every single side, I've got a little bit of an agenda set up for things to discuss this morning. Please also feel free to dive in and ask questions. I'm going to just break off this chat here, pop out chat. Cool. So now we can focus on our agenda for today. Okay. So really, there are three pieces of information, or three areas that I'd like to cover this morning, to go through, and then I'm also open to ask any questions that you guys might have. Please let me know in the chat if you are missing anything or if you can't hear properly, and we can see whether or not we can't sort that out. Okay, cool. So there are three main things that I'd like to cover this morning. The first is product use contexts. So that was in the previous module 2. Second thing is to look at outcomes and stakeholder management. So that was in module 3. And then finally to just look at the current module, module 4, and just focus on a couple of tips as we head into the assignments and possibly deal with any questions that might have risen up in the discussion forums. At the end of the day, this is some time that I've set aside to also answer any questions. So if there's anything else that you'd like to ask, please feel free to in the live chat, and we can take it from there. So kicking off straight away, the product use, I just like to look at 3 different assignments that did very well in the class around module 2, around the product use contexts. Then I'm going to just touch on the idea of like how frequently one should keep them updated, both in real life and in the educational context of the course. And then finally, just a word of encouragement for those of you who perhaps might have struggled with the product use context and not felt entirely comfortable with all the areas that you need to detail on, and just kind of sharing some of my personal experience about how to get that to function well. Cool. So if everyone's happy with that, then just give me a bit of a thumbs up on the side forum. Just let me know that I'm heading in the right direction. Oh no, not a zipper mouth. So yeah. Okay. All right. Okay, cool. So there are 3 assignments, 3 example assignments that I'd like to look at this week. The first is the one from Sherilyn, the second from Mark, and the third from Amandla. Let's start with Sherilyn's. Just bring this up onto the side. Okay, cool. So what I want to do is I want to indicate 3 examples of separate product use contexts that I thought functioned well. I'm not going to go through line by line every single part of these assignments. I just want to kind of highlight particular stylistic points and showing that particularly there isn't one perfect way of doing this, that there are actually a couple of different ways, and you can use whichever one's going to work the best for you in a particular, in the right context. Okay, so in the case of Sherilyn's, what I liked about her process was she kind of kept it in free text. So she sort of said, so let's say, for instance, what are the aims of the project for the client? Bearing in mind that in the later modules, we've now had a chance to see the stakeholder videos and have a little bit of a better understanding of what the aims are for the project. She just highlights here root cause analysis of slow user uptake to introduce improvements, giving the client's existing web client competitive advantage and improve overall usability, whilst preserving the unparalleled safety, security, and privacy that they offer to their user base. Cool. So crisp, to the point, outlining it, but still in a bit of a written or discursive style, which is quite nice, and answering essentially the question in a sort of fairly natural language context. Here, how will the user obtain the system? She chooses to indicate that it'll be via web browser, but she adds some additional context here by talking about technical things in parentheses, which is useful. Similarly, when she talks about smartphones, the same thing applies. So very well structured. Okay, in terms of looking at the characteristics and the potential user requirements, the style sort of continues and highlights certain characteristic items. What I thought was interesting was just looking at the localization context and pointing out that there are 11 spoken languages in South Africa. Of the top 4 she believes should apply, which is an interesting point. Okay. She also, in terms of education levels, alludes to some context in terms of Stats SA. Okay. Importantly, one of the things that some people feel about grids like these are, one has to fill every single block. I think she did very well in terms of just saying when something wasn't relevant or it was a none, she said as such. Here, and I think this is one that a lot of people get stuck on, is software environment to be used in system development. So the first thing she said was, well, we're going to continue building it in what we're building it in, which I think is a good point. And then the other thing that she did was she said, let's conduct research to determine whether there are any limitations to the current framework and if there's a need to change. Now, this speaks to the idea of a product use context being something that's a living, breathing, evolving document. This is not something where we're kind of putting stakes in the ground and saying, this is where the product is going to be and nothing is going to change. Instead, what Sherilyn's done here is she's left herself and the product and thus the project the latitude to essentially bring other elements in, which I think is very useful. And then just carrying on, again, just more of the same, good exploration and good discursive exploration. What I thought was nice in the uncommon and common usage is she already started to bring in the concepts of archetypes or personas in terms of saying, okay, cool, the techno boffin-girl and the hoarder, looking at those two contexts, which I think is useful. So that she's already identifying those, which works well. Okay, cool. On to marks. So what are the characteristics of Sherilyn's is well thought out, responsive, and discursive. In the case of Mark, we kind of have a bit of a midpoint between Sherilyn and Mandla's assignments, where what he does is he's very, very clear in terms of just to the point, slightly discursive in his answers. He's just going, where will the system use, anywhere the users are, and where there's an internet connection on a desktop. And then he points out, consider a downloadable app for mobile devices. So he's not sort of saying, this is how it's going to be used forever. He's just saying, presently, this is how it's used. And what I liked about, and what I felt was correct in a product use context here, was he kept things very much to the point in terms of saying both the characteristics and the other elements and the user requirements. He just kept it very, very simple. Motivation to use, being able to access emails wherever there's internet, and peace of mind. System must be able to use and be more robust than competitors. Added security features set apart from competitors. So he didn't go and make it too wordy or anything. He kept it very, very direct to the point, and that's perfectly acceptable, especially in light of what we're going to chat about in a moment, which is things evolving. Then he followed the instruction in terms of the usage hypothesis. When we say, give me 2 examples, one of common usage and one of uncommon usage, it helps. I mean, this is just like a pro tip. For the marker, it's a lot easier for me if you're giving it to me exactly as I'd expect it to be. They are common usage, uncommon usage. What would they use it for? Common usage, uncommon usage. We're sort of leading you in writing the question to structure things in a good way. Now, this isn't purely about making something academically correct. This is also about making something more viable for, sorry, Audrey. Sorry, Audrey's just saying the sound's distorted. Is anyone else getting distorting sound? Okay, I'm I'm going to continue on the assumption that the screen is blurring. Audrey, I think this may be the bandwidth on your computer because this is a stream. In which case, it should be if there's any parts that you've missed, come back to it once the stream has been fully uploaded to YouTube. They'll then reprocess it and it should be a little bit easier to view. I apologize for that. But it might be the network on your side. On my side, I am on fiber, so it should be streaming fairly well. But do let me know if the sound continues to be bad. I have to close the window so that there's no air moving over the microphone or anything like that. So just coming back to my point here around the common usage versus uncommon usage. So the common usage and the uncommon usage, we're really just trying to make things well structured, which is important for us and will be important when you are writing these kind of things in a commercial context as well. Mark then also references particular references, which he then includes later on in the document. So let me just scroll down, gives me the bibliography. This isn't quite an APA referencing, but that's okay. And that just also then helps me to understand that he's done some additional reading. He's given himself a little bit more context in terms of where things are, and that can be very, very helpful. Cool. Then on to the final one of the M2 assignments was a Madla. Now, for me, on a practical level, Amandla's assignment was very well structured in the sense that bullet points, okay, just straight up, a lot of information, but crisp, to the point, essentially on each item being able to go, okay, cool, this is what I want, this is what, these are the items. Now, you might say, well, how is that different from just putting it into a sentence? From a maintainability point of view, what Amandla is doing here is it's enabling the document to evolve and be able to be swapped out easily because there isn't more than one idea being added to a bullet point. Now, this can be, sorry, my cat's just jumping around. This can be a problem if there's overkill. But in the so there are some documents where things are not well suited to bullet points. But in the case of this, in the case of a document that you're wanting to, okay, cool. So I will give an example of that. I did include sorry, this is just around APA referencing. We'll take a look at UCT Libraries Guide on that, which you can take a look at. And the other thing to explore is a very good tool called Mendeley, which I think I have posted in the class reference about. We'll come back to that in a moment. So essentially, we've got the bullet point lists, which make it easier for us to essentially remove things and add them, and makes the document a lot easier to evolve. But this wouldn't always be the case. It's not always a good idea to use bullet points, but in this case, it was useful. And you can see that Amandla sort of kept this paradigm right the way through the who would use it, what's the common and uncommon usage. And so structurally, for me, that was a good pattern that worked well. Okay, so just coming back now to our list. So we want to look at 3 different good. So before we look at keeping PUCs updated, let's just quickly rush off to browser here. Okay, so Mendeley. So if you install Mendeley, I think I may have it. Yes, there we go. Okay, so Mendeley is a reference tool. So this allows you to manage your references and pull in a lot of different information. So in my case, for instance, I belong to an organization called ATM. Let's bring up a word. Just check that I've got Mendeley running here. Okay, so if I was writing a reference, this is maybe a bit of an academic point, but I think it's useful for those of you who are hoping to do further study. So if we go to references, okay, so I haven't installed Mendeley on this laptop. I apologize, this is a new laptop for me, but we'll install that now. So I'm going to sign in. So let's say here on my ACM, I want to find one of the magazines that I get from ACM is called Interactions, which is a UX magazine, which we'll take a look at it now. So this is the latest one, volume 25. Cool. There we go. Passwords. Yep. Cool. Cool. So this is my academic profile. I can then go from Mendeley. Here's this tool. You can download Mendeley. You can download it for Windows. Here we go. Citation plugin. Okay, so Microsoft Word. Use a citation plugin. No, they're not receiving. Okay. Sorry, guys. I know this might seem a bit dry. I'm just trying to get this all sorted. Okay. So if I wanted to go, okay, so there's no references in this material. Let me actually just look for something else. So if we were to say, look at product use contexts, we look at product use context, I'm searching. Okay, we've got an article here. Moving context kit, designing for context shift and multi-device experiences. So that's pretty useful. That's from 2017. We can click on this. Okay, I can pull down the whole reference, etc., or I can go to Mendeley. Let's download the PDF available. Yes, I'd like to do that. Pop this in UX. So when you're searching on the web, you can basically say, okay, cool, I want to bring together a particular link or a particular document. It's then going to save that to my Mendeley. Mendeley desktop. Let's suppose Word, because I think I'm going to need to reinstall. I'm going to have to install that separately. Okay. You don't need an academic address to sign up for Mendeley. You could register with your own account. The better of the academic address is just so that I can connect with colleagues around the world that are talking the same subject area. So that's the benefit of that. Okay, so here it's just saying install citation plugin. Do you want to? Yes, please load. Okay, let's try again. Cool. So now my citation plugin is installed. So in my case, I'm doing my thesis on e-forensics and stuff around avionics, which is a whole separate story. But basically, if I go into that UX folder, that moving context kit that we just looked at, it's already there. Details are correct, you know, and it's got a whole bunch of different detail there. So if I was then wanting to put in an APA citation inside an article, I could then go references. Now you see Mendeley over my references section. the style, I can choose whichever style I want. In my case, I want APA. Go insert citation. I can then search for moving context. See it appears. Click on that, go OK. And now I have the citation. So I might say, so this in my academic context might be as cited, or no, that would be moving contexts are important as systems increasingly are divorced from single devices and are other experienced as the divergent and code-based. Nothing very good of a sentence, and then I would have my citation. And at the end of the document, then what I could do is I could say, all right, cool, insert the bibliography, and that would be a formally correct. So, you know, that would give me a formally correct set of details for my document. So that's obviously super useful if you're an academic or you're trying to put together a lot of referencing. It's not just for academic documents, so you could also go and say, all right, cool. Let's say I was going to go to Smashing Magazine. This has obviously some utility in commerce as well, if you want trying to put together a lot of stuff. Perfect accordion, I don't know if that's really super relevant. UX. Oh. Let's maybe rather go to medium. I'm going to do some research. I'm going to look up product use context. Okay, some stuff for Slack. Okay, maybe this is the thing I want to go read, for example. In some miraculous world, I'll actually get to that link. I don't know what's going on there. So this is a product management hub. I've got this article. I can also bring up again Mensley. It'll see what there's a, then it'll say, okay, it's a type web page. I can see the author is Karthik Prabhu. And then I might put some abstract details that tell me when I accessed it and so on and so forth. I say this YouTube showing shopping ads based on video content. Then, for whatever reason, if I was back in my Word document, yada, 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 yada. I can now insert another citation. Go YouTube. How do you spell it? Second. YouTube shows and Prabhu. So I can go here and I can say, all right, cool. Prabhu. Audrey. Still syncing. Okay, so it's pulling down a lot of content here. Let's just put in another article that I've previously used in some other research inside a thread. Okay, 2014, and then you can see the bibliography automatically gets updated. APA, always the author's names, enough for it to be distinct, the year of publication, and then the full details in the bibliography. Okay, cool. I'm not going to belabor that point. I mean, you can also go and check things online and see examples of that. Okay, so back to our agenda now. So depth of knowledge, firstly, keeping PUCs updated. We sort of alluded to that in what I was chatting to you guys about with Amadla. It's important that a PUC is something that you're going to keep updated in real life throughout a project. Depending on the length of the project, if the project was going to be, let's say, 3 to 6 months time, then I would say you're probably going to update it once every 2 months or so. So there would be one at the beginning of the project, one sort of 1/3 of the way through, one in the last third, and then one at the end. Just compare and do version tracking through one to the next. In the context of this course, I do not suggest that you guys keep the product use context updated unless you really, really want to, and it's something you want to practice. The reason I'm saying that is I think otherwise you run the risk that there's simply going to be too much to get done, and I don't want to have a situation where some of your marks on other work that you're doing down it doesn't receive sufficient time. We haven't in the timing plan included the idea that the PUC is going to be kept updated by you, and it's certainly not something that is going to be marked later on. So by all means, go ahead, but I would just be quite careful in terms of keeping that updated continuously. Okay, cool. In terms of the PUCs, there are a lot of people who ask questions about, but I don't know about human factors in terms of how software is going to be used in different environmental constraints. I don't know anything about software. I don't know anything about design. The thing I want to really encourage you to do there is read. I mean, the more you can read, the more you can learn about how people have interacted with things, the richer your knowledge set is around product use contexts. So the really exciting things about UX is that we get to work in an interdisciplinary environment that brings together design, technology, psychology, and so a product use context is something that is going to be as rich as your knowledge and the breadth of your knowledge is. That doesn't mean to say that you need to know everything. It's okay to identify in the PUC that you need to go and gain further information, but I think it's also important to recognize that you want to try and read as widely as possible. Just a couple of books that you might want to look at, or that you might want to read. So there's obviously Don Norman's The Design of Everyday Things, very famous book, kind of the basis of human factors research. So that's an absolutely fantastic book to go and have a read. So I definitely recommend that. A couple of other books that you might want to look at. One is called Just My Type, which is about fonts by Simon Garfield, which you might think like, well, how interesting can that be? But in fact, many fonts that we use on our computers were designed hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So something like Gil Sans was designed it was designed about 100 years ago. The whole differences between serif and unserifed fonts, important thing to understand, and to understand how fonts relate to how people interact with information, because most information is presented obviously in type. So very, very important to have an understanding of those things. Once I read this book by Garfield, I then also read another one of his, which is really fantastic, called On the Map, which is all around how maps have affected people's way of thinking, thinking about space, thinking about perception. So very, very useful to read things that are about how do people interact with information. Because if you think about it, there's a lot of what we're doing that relates to how people are interacting with information. And some of the earliest ways in which that has been done is in things like maps. Another really powerful, great web resource is Flowing Data. So this talks a lot about visualization of information, and it's good because it kind of gives us a sense of the cutting edge of what people are interacting with and getting comfortable with. So very, very useful website to explore as well, flowingdata.com. Finally, if one's thinking about things like that, another thing, if you're just trying to get a good sort of update of things to think about and things to look at, one is Brain Pickings. What's lovely about Brain Pickings, it comes out every Sunday, so you can kind of have a quiet like Sunday read, and it talks about a wide variety of different ideas, different concepts, giving you depth of information. So go check out brainpickings.org. It really is wonderful, and it's a good sort of brain freshener before the weekend. These are just things that, in my experience, are really, really great multidisciplinary source of information. And you've obviously got the classics, TED Talks, and things like Roman Mars's 99 Design and 99 Visible. So there's a lot of stuff that you can try and keep yourself mentally stimulated in terms of human factors and design. Okay. I hope this is all at least interesting for everyone. Okay, on to outcomes and stakeholder management. So there isn't really a big assignment to be marked in Module 3. There's obviously been a lot of discussion in the discussion forums and the small group forums, and thank you, and I think that's been good. I really just want to share a couple of things that I'd like to use this time now to just unpack a little bit. The first is just the challenge of managing people in a UX project. The thing that you need to manage as the UX practitioner is the overall user experience. And to do that, it's going to involve people. Now, that doesn't require you to be an extrovert or someone who's going to win an argument every single time, or that isn't what it's about. The key to managing both people and their expectations is good communication, and good communication starts with listening. So what I'd like to encourage you all to do is to practice listening. Do conscious practicing of listening. You might think, well, what do I even mean by that? Think about the time that you spend maybe with your spouse, your partner. It's easy for us to, because those people are familiar to us, it's easy for us to hear them but stop listening. But in addition to that, I think the other place where you can practice listening, maybe with someone less familiar, and it can actually make you a better communicator, is work really, really hard at listening to people you don't like. Okay. Now, you might say, well, I'm someone who just loves everyone. Well, then listen to the person you like the least. It doesn't need to be an active hatred, but in listening deeply and carefully and considering the things that are being said by someone, where what they're saying is distasteful to you, or what they're saying is wrong to you, or what they're saying is not right to you, is something that you're going to need to practice. Because in managing a UX project, as being a UX practitioner, people are going to say things to you that you believe are not true, or you believe are not applicable. And the skill you want to develop there is the ability to listen to that, to take it on board, and to deconstruct it in a way to establish, A, are they actually right? And I'm just prejudiced to the way that they're thinking. Are they wrong? And can I rationally explain why they're wrong in a respectful way to try and convince them of my opinion? Do I not know if they're right or wrong? Do I need to go and do further reading, further thinking about what they're saying? Because it's our role as UX practitioners to often be the ear of the project, to be the people who are listening to what the stakeholders are conveying. And that was really the core challenge that we were trying to establish with the videos. And it's interesting to me that some people have said, well, I couldn't find 10 objectives, or, I didn't understand what the difference was between what the person was saying versus, some sort of subtext or goal that they were seeking. And what I would say to you there is, and the main feedback I would give there, setting aside the course and setting aside the videos, the main thing that you are needing to practice there is listening more carefully. Trying to listen to what it is the person is saying. Listening is a wonderful thing to practice, and it's a wonderful skill to develop. And I think many of us would like to think that we're great listeners. I certainly would like to think that I'm a great listener. But the truth of the matter is that however good you are at it, and there are people who are better than others, it's always something that you can improve on. It's always something that you can practice. And if we just kind of, and I think there are a couple of steps that one can follow to becoming a good listener. The first thing, and this might sound counterintuitive, is to ask questions when you're uncertain. So a lot of people will listen to an idea from someone, and then they will leave it at that because they're afraid or they're scared that if they ask a further question, that it might seem to the other person that they're stupid or they don't understand what the person's saying. Don't be afraid of not understanding what someone's saying. It's perfectly reasonable to not understand what someone else is saying. And then you're left with a choice. You come to a fork in the road. Either you can, well, there are three things you can do. You can lie to yourself and say, well, I do actually understand it, and make up your own truth. You can go, I definitely don't understand it, but I'm afraid to ask, and it'll be no further clarified. Or the third thing you can do if you don't understand, sorry, I don't quite understand it, could you try explaining it to me again? And I think you'll find that most people, unless they're extremely rushed, will take another crack at it, because it's extremely important that you, especially when you're involved in a UX project, that you do understand it correctly. So I think continually asking questions, as long as the questions are not repetitive, can be helpful in terms of unpacking it. So listening is not simply the act of hearing, it's also about deciding how to process the information that you hear. And sometimes that requires a further clarification of what's being said to you. Another good thing to practice with listening is to record conversations. With the permission of everyone involved, and then just for 5 minutes, get someone to tell you a story. Okay, there used to be something called Kim's game that I used to play when I was a scout, where you get shown a tray of items for 60 seconds. The tray of items is revealed, and then a cloth is thrown over it, and then you have 3 minutes to try and write down everything you can see. So it's a memory game. Okay, the same is true. One could do the same thing. You could say, go to a friend, then we all have cell phones these days. Record a 5-minute story, get them to tell you about something. Okay, and then write down. So not writing down while they're talking, because then that's note taking. Listen to what they're saying, and then take 5 minutes to try and recount the story to yourself in writing. Then, with the person, play back the audio and literally tick for yourself what points you got right and mark with an X that you got wrong. Because that skill of practicing listening and then what was actually said versus what you thought was said is a wonderful way of reflecting on whether or not you're actually correct in terms of your assumptions and the assumptions that you're making. And I think you can find that can be very, very beneficial. So the managing people, managing expectations is a lot of it's about developing and fostering that concept of doing right now. Then the other thing around outcomes and stakeholder management is just managing an outcome plan. So from the outset, communicating to everyone in the project, these are the things that we're wanting to achieve, and not getting too far down side paths that are not aligned to the outcomes that you're wanting to achieve. And that comes from practice, obviously. Don't let, and I've seen this happen with a lot of projects, don't let your role as the UX practitioner become the project manager. Project management is tough. If you're the project manager and you're having to you're doing the UX, I would say that can happen, but now there's tremendous risk, because the risk is that the UX outcomes and artifacts are going to be diminished by the pressures that come with managing the project. So that separation of concerns between the project manager, the UX practitioner, the designer, the business analyst, the developer, all of those roles, keeping them separate are important. Is important. The other thing not to lose sight of there, in terms of, there was a question that was asked last week around, well, surely it's okay to be both the UI designer and the UX person. Yeah, it's okay, but it's not going to give you any real benefit. In fact, it's going to be more difficult for you in the team, because it'll be too easy to bleed the one function to the other. That's why teams are, the sums are greater than the part. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. That fact that someone can be able to really wear two hats, it's very, very difficult. So try to be very, very careful to align your UX plan to the project plan, but don't let the UX plan become the project plan, because the project plan should track all sorts of deliverables that aren't really related to the UX deliverables. So just be careful. I will often call it like sort of be Switzerland. Try and stay neutral in a project. So if you're the UX practitioner, it's your goal to bat for all the stakeholders, the end users, the internal users, every single person, the human factors that are coming to bear inside the project. And for that to happen, you need to stay neutral. Don't pick a side. Classic mistake that a lot of UX practitioners make is they think they need to fight for the end user. Absolutely, the end user is probably going to be the person who's going to spend the most hours using the product, and therefore their needs often do supersede other people's needs. But if your stance is simply, well, whatever you need is someone who's building this thing or involved in this thing or training on this thing is irrelevant in comparison to the end user, then you're not being neutral. You're taking a position that one stakeholder, one role player supersedes the others, and that's extremely dangerous, because that is going to result in not only just hurt feelings and inefficiencies, but it's also going to result potentially in those people actually attacking you and attacking that other stakeholder, and that's how bad products get developed. So if when saying, well, I want to develop great products and I want to develop great products for all the users involved, then it's very, very important to try to stay as neutral as possible. And related to that then is you don't want to inject your own desires into things. This is like pitfall number one. We all have things that we believe about the way software should work, about the way the world should work, about the way people should interact, about the way people should interact with things. There are things that we prefer aesthetics, so some of us like black, and some of us blue, and some of us yellow, and some of us pink, and there are so many choices that we all make as individuals that are relevant to us. And if we believe that our own desire should supersede everyone else's, then there's great danger. And I think if we look at outliers, and we look at people like Steve Jobs, or we look at someone like Elon Musk, and we see these people who kind of made the argument that I know best and I get to make the decision. For every Steve Jobs, there's 100,000 absolute chops making assertions and demanding that people do it their way without thinking about other people. And what we have to do is we need to say, well, the vast majority of people, in fact, almost statistically all of us, are people who need to find means of working that are balanced with other people. And even then, once you scratch at the sort of the myth of the individual, you know, for every Steve Jobs, there's a Johnny Ive, and there's a team of designers, and there's a team of people who are balancing ideas. So this idea that you, I, or any person inside a process can be some kind of benevolent dictator who is able to make all the decisions and our desires are the right ones, I have never seen that function greatly. I think with sufficient investigation, whenever someone says, oh, this person is a visionary, or this person is the person who can make all the decisions, you know, once you really unpack it, you realize that when any of us are isolated to make decisions on our own, it doesn't make sense. You might say, well, you're the head tutor getting all the decisions. Well, no, I'm not. I have to work with Philip. I work with also the course convener, Michael Pollock at UCT. We sit down all the time to check, you know, sense check that the decisions that are being made are making sense. And that is a healthy tension to exist. So don't inject your own desires into outcomes and stakeholder management. If you guys have any other questions, please fire them away in our chat. I am seeing them there. Okay, cool. So just on to some current module tips. You know, as you guys go into module 4, sorry, my cat is attacking the screen. She's in love with my laptop. So first thing is just that rationales matter more than results when you're talking about user research in the short time frame that you guys have. I want, you know, not to sound kind of trite, but I want to understand what's given rise to you asking the questions that you're asking more than what the results are, because you're not going to be able to get a significant enough statistical sample to actually indicate a meaningful answer to the question. So even 2-3 people, it's you practicing the exercise of interviewing the person, trying to not lead them an answer. But the more meaningful content in this module coming up on Tuesday is the rationale. Why have you asked this question? What do you believe you're going to ascertain through sufficient gathering of answers to this question? Those are the important things that you want to do. So that's what I want to understand. That's the main thing I would like to extract. Secondly, in practice, test, and keep on testing. I think we spoke to that with the optional setting around, the optional assignment around guerrilla testing. You never stop testing your product, because also people's interaction with software is constantly evolving, and I think that that's something that you want to constantly be testing. If we just went and said, cool, this product that we created a couple of years ago, this still stands true, that's very, very rare. Firstly, there's obviously patterns in design, so things like flat design versus skeuomorphic, those come about, but also even just paradigms. something like WhatsApp becomes incredibly disruptive, because, in a positive way, because it creates a whole new user interface paradigm that is well understood by a lot of users. And I think if you look at the UX that's done by, let's call it Facebook, in the sense of Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, firstly, they're not afraid to say, let's, and it's often called copying, but I mean, they'll say, all right, cool, something like Snapchat stories, we can see this works well. Then they'll roll it into one product, then they'll roll it across into, and it moves out of being a product specific feature and rather just becomes an actual user experience archetype. And so I think there's a lot to be said in terms of testing your assumptions, continue testing your products and your patterns. Coming to Audrey's question, as a UX designer, should you consider the brand colors over what user experience research shows? Fantastic question. So I think there are a couple of ways that can be solved. I mean, it depends on the brand, to be completely honest. So they're brands and they're brands. I think if you are talking about a global brand or a large national brand which has an truly quantifiable brand value, so I would say, in South African context, someone like Virgin Active or one of the banks or one of the insurers or telco companies, or trying to think of Vida, Chicken Licken, what are big national brands that have kind of emerged in the South African context? Even something like a Telkom. I mean, your really, really big brands, you could argue that there's so much that's been communicated and so much money has actually been spent in communicating those brand colors to end users that that those brand colors should be taken into consideration. However, when a brand is of that size, they generally have gone through a brand design that is sufficient, that it has secondary, tertiary levels of palettes to be used in a lot of different contexts. So I found it quite rare to find a truly valuable brand that doesn't have a brand palette that's deep enough to touch on what's coming out of your user experience research. However, that's probably, to the point of the Steve Jobs, Elon Musk thing, that's probably not the brand that most people end up having to encounter. The brands that people are encountering, and I see this in my own business, is you've got like a startup, and we recently just had a situation with a company where we did the UX for building of a mobile app for people running their own businesses. And so we did the wireframing. We didn't do the aesthetic design. We then came up with some aesthetic design. They had received some branding work that had been done by one of the largest independent ad agencies in the country. They then, after the wireframing, went back into further work. They came up with some nice suggestions. It wasn't really like a big problem for us in terms of what was coming through, but there I can see now that the branding has now entrenched around a lot of gradients, to be honest, because the gradient pattern inside the mobile application is being used to convey weather. So there's a large part of this application that deals with being outside. So we're actually using the weather signal. So what's the weather, where the user is, to define the palette, essentially. And so the brand has actually had to modify to that user experience goal. And it hasn't been such a big issue because the client has felt well treated from the brand side, from the ad agency. However, there are also a lot of times where you might have a brand, you look at a color like red. Red's often used in brands. It's a strong color. It is immediately, people see it, they recognize it. So there's a lot of brand theory that says red works really, really well. And so what happens then is, of course, red means a lot of things in a UX context that's maybe not perfect or not ideal. But you can work around that. I think you have to, I don't know if I'm really on the question. I think ultimately what you have to do is you need to balance it. And look, I've been in enough meetings where I have to talk about the brand police or the brand Nazis to kind of know that the brand colors can be a bit of an issue. But I think the color should be primary ever in user experience, because from an accessibility point of view, you have to assume that some people are going to be colorblind. So that should be really constraining in a lot of contexts, it should be constraining your design. And also color color has an important role to play, but because of the diversity and the breadth of color can also be subject to the brand color. So I don't think it's about choosing the brand color over it. I think it's about recognizing that there's a balance that has to be struck between the communication value of the brand over the over what might have come out of UX research. That being said, I would not ask a lot of color-based questions around user experience, and the reason why is because color means a lot of different things to a lot of different people in a lot of different contexts and cultures. So in fact, let me just bring this up here. Color meaning. Great visualization. I'll just sort of explain this. Yeah, there we go. So if you look at this thing from visually, so is it? You can see that color, has a lot of different meanings in different cultures. So I'd go check this out. I'm gonna pop this link here and just have a look at it. So even then, so if you went and you let's say you had a brand that was operating in China, a lot of stuff's going to be red because red's got lots of connotations, mostly positive, in a Chinese context. Then the question becomes, well, that's a good luck factor, whereas red obviously means something very, very different in like a Western culture. So, I think, it's something one needs to kind of manage and look at different contexts. But I think that if you're dealing with a brand that is entrenched, you need to be very, very careful about throwing the baby out with the bathwater. There's a lot of value around secondary and tertiary colors in a brand CI. So I think just be careful with that. I wouldn't say attack the brand just because one's got a little bit of research. To dwell on that. If I go and I do a sample of 50,000 people worldwide, and I'm going to be building an app for Coke, and then I take that research, and the research says that people like the color blue. That does not, 90% of that 50,000 people could say they prefer the color blue for a particular button. That does not supersede the fact that the brand color of Coca-Cola is red and white and silver and has been for over 100 years. And the implications of that are massive, and my UX research then shouldn't supersede that. If I have a brand that is new, relatively new, and I've sampled 1,000 people who have all indicated that they want to engage with the product, and they choose a color that, and there's color research that indicates that their colors are superior to the colors that the brand has chosen, then I could make a very different case. So you can see it really is a sort of a horses for courses situation. Kobus, you mentioned that one should not confuse the project plan with the UX plan. From what I understand, the UX designer work closely with the project manager. Is this true? Yes, but in the same way that really every stakeholder should work closely with the project manager. From the course material so far, I felt the UX designer's position within the large project scope is a bit unclear when it comes especially to timelines. The interviews with the stakeholders give an impression that we're to some extent responsible for the project management as well. Okay, cool. So I think what I'm trying to highlight here, Kobus, is that sometimes you get projects that are just UX projects, in which case the practitioner often will be the project manager. So you would, in that case, manage your own project because you're going to be doing research and so on and so forth, and you don't necessarily need an independent PM. If you are building a product in which there are many different moving parts, it doesn't make sense then that you would be that designer. Sorry, you wouldn't be that project manager. But and also just to separate between UX designer versus UX analyst, or I just want to kind of use the general term practitioner, because sometimes you might be someone in a UX team and you're just doing written work and you're just doing research and you're not actually going to end up doing wireframing. Similarly, you might be in a team and you're not going to do any of that research. You can be a participant and you're going to get that research from the UX analyst, but then you might actually do the wireframing with, inside that multidisciplinary team. And then you might have other situations where you're the UI designer, you're the analyst, you're the project manager, you're the coder, maybe even the person. So it does depend, but I think maybe just come back to this point about the designer's position inside the project scope is a bit unclear, especially with timelines. I think what you need to be able to do is you need to be able to say, these are the artifacts that I'm going to deliver. So I'm going to deliver a product use context. I'm going to put together a hypothesis matrix. I'm going to be able to conduct research. This is how long it's going to take me to do recruitment. This is how many people I plan on talking to. These are the questions I plan on asking. These are the deliverables I'm going to generate. These are the wireframes. This is how much time I'm going to need. This is how much time I'm going to need for reverse, clickable products, and so on and so forth. So I think your role is not necessarily to manage the project. Your role is to be able to have a good way of estimating how long it takes you to get something done based on previous experience and based on the depth and complexity of the thing that you're needing to analyze. Audrey's next question. Thank you, because I had an issue where it was requested that a brand be dominant. The UX designers refused my request. So I thought I was just being difficult. No, no. In short, no. There, I would say the UX designers are being difficult, and I think that then also speaks to the point I was making a little bit earlier around don't inject your own desires into things. I would argue that if a designer is calling themselves user experience designer and they want to diminish the value of a brand or the value of any stakeholder outside of themselves and placing themselves above it, they need to bring you quantifiable evidence and a quantifiable rationale and a qualitative rationale around why a decision should be made. And that's why, for instance, with this current module, I want you to practice rationales, because the reasons that you make an assertion are important. It is not okay to just make assumptions, and it is not okay to just simply assert something to be true. You have to be able to produce evidence, and evidence has varying levels of accuracy, and that's okay. But if someone just says like, no, I just refuse, I think I think you, and that speaks to the listening point, you're right to then go, okay, I hear that you refuse. Can you please tell me why? Can you please explain to me why? I'm not trying to be difficult or whatever. I'm just trying to, clear this information from both sides. So I can tell the brand people, this is why we chose a color that conflicts with the brand, and here's the reason why. And then similarly be able to feed back to those people and say, well, let me tell you why I think it's important that, the brand's colors matter. I would say that especially, and it does come down to brand value with fresh or younger brands, I mean, it's so difficult. The more I think about it, the more I would say that those guys are probably being unreasonable, because what is the argument for a color? Like in a UX context, I think it's very, very tough. Like the patterns that I would generally find that apply well with color is, let me use color to mean something, but not necessarily say this color should be this color. So I can understand where I say, okay, cool, there are 5 distinct pieces of information I want to convey inside this application, and each section is going to have leading color, and so that the user can be conditioned to know that they're in a different space or that a different function operates against a particular color. But then to argue that that color should be a specific color, I find that is extremely difficult to argue, and I think that that starts to delve into the realm of a matter of taste, and I think you're going to find people who are just asserting a preference. So I think that sort of speaks to finding a middle way and trying to say, okay, cool, in general, how can I find a middle path between each of the different stakeholders? And that's difficult. I think it was Bill Clinton said, the trouble with walking in the middle of the road is you get hit from both sides. The thing is that if you are trying to find a balance between different ideas, then you are likely to get flack from both sides. At the same time, once you feel that you need to be a shrinking violet, or everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but they're not entitled to their own facts. There are some things that are fully true. It's not like like ideas are not like coins. They don't both have to have. You don't have to give both sides a full hearing. I think it's about being compassionate, being empathetic, listening to people in a project, but then at a certain point, not about arguing for insight. At a certain point, also being strong to kind of say, no, look, here we've actually got to draw the line here and say that this isn't acceptable. And I think again that ties to my whole like be Switzerland thing. Switzerland isn't neutral because other people just respect them. Switzerland's neutral because they're armed to the teeth and are an incredibly difficult country to conquer. So I think there's something to be said. Neutrality is not weakness. Saying I am going to give everyone a fair hearing, I'm going to listen to all of you, and then I'm going to clear those ideas and break down entrenched positions from all sides. That's powerful. That's effective neutrality. There's nothing wrong with being constructively disobedient and saying, I'm sorry, but what you are saying here is not right for the following reasons, and you can overrule me if you're the CEO or whatever, or if you're the creative director and you're saying that the brand colors must supersede the suggestions from you. I've at least noted my point. I have conveyed in the artifacts that I've prepared as the UX practitioner my detail, the truth of the matter as I've understood, and then ultimately, depending on the power structures in place, certain decisions are going to be made. Cool. All right. So that's been an hour. Thank you all very much for your time. Are there any other questions? There's a little bit of a delay between when I talk and when it actually lands up on the video. So just let me know if there are any other questions, and then we'll have another session like this next week Sunday. If the audio or the video has been a little bit dodgy, generally what happens once our friends at Google and at YouTube have processed it, it sort of tightens up a little bit. But thank you all very much for your time. So if you've got any other questions, bash them off. Otherwise, I'm going to end off this Hangouts in the next like 2 minutes or so. Okay, just one extra thing here for Robin. So just about the user recruitment survey, I think it's one of those incredibly difficult things. What we've tried to do with the module is present two things. We tried to show the formal user recruitment as a way to get you used to the process, where if you were trying to recruit like 10 or 20, 30 or 40 people, you would kind of say, all right, these are some demographic information I need about the person, and then other additional pieces of information. But so the survey then is largely about driving demographic gathering. That relates to when things about the color point that I was making a little bit earlier. You want to be able to send out some of the findings by demographic data. So in the marketing context, often that's around LSM. So if I am going to talk to several thousand people, in fact, I'm going to stop screen sharing for a moment. I just need to log into a system where I just want to make 100% sure that that I'm showing you guys stuff that you shouldn't see. So let me just quickly go here. I'll show you an example of a recruitment survey that we ran at Full Stack. Okay, I'll just log in here. So what we did in this particular project is we segmented out by LSM, and we had a Facebook campaign running that basically allowed us to. We were using the Facebook campaign to target particular kinds of users. So we knew, for instance, that a particular campaign would land up with a particular kind of person by virtue of some of their Facebook information. So that's just one of those things to highlight. Where is this? There we go. Okay. Yeah, Okay, let me just bring this back up. Okay, so I'm showing the whole screen again. Ew. Okay, cool. So basically, what we had here was we had a bunch of different surveys, but what you'll notice here is some are high LSM, some are high-low LSM, lower-low LSM, and we were running essentially a competition where we were trying to get responses so we could segment out the data. So in the case of this survey, we were going to do some research on a fitness app, and we basically then to people, okay, cool, we're going to ask you a couple of questions, and then depending on the LSM of the ad campaign, we showed them different offers where they could win certain prizes. So the questions we would ask is we would segment out by like, how old are you, what is your gender, how many children do you have, what type of home do you live in, formal housing or informal housing, what's your highest level of school education. We asked them a question about have you recently gone through any life-changing events. This is essentially trying to indicate whether or not the person has a slight elation or deflation factor. So if someone's recently gotten married or they've had a birth of a child, they're generally elated. If they're divorced, death of a loved one, or change of work, they generally, it basically indicates that their responses are going to move off the mean by a certain deviation. We asked them how often they smoke. This is a classic screening question because, in fact, this is a binary question. Even though you're saying every day, sometimes, rarely, never, if anything's not never, it means they smoke, in which case it's a fail. Or assuming, well, you can essentially assume that they then smoke. So what I mean by that is the screener question is actually, do you smoke or not? And if you say that, most people then say, no, I don't smoke, because they assume, rightfully, because there's a fitness survey, we want to know about whether or not they're a smoker. So we can see if we're going to try and target the product around smokers, we can subset that set of users in the recruitment survey. Then we ask them, like, how do they access the internet? This is a big indicator also of income. So if someone's on fiber or Wi-Fi mobile network, it's quite good. If they go dial-up or don't have access to the internet, that tells you things as well. Then we have a whole like sort of when do you use the gym? What's your current physical activity? What are your main types of activity? What's your duration, intensity? I mean, there's a whole bunch of then like context-sensitive questions. Okay, so leave. Come back to your question. So the question is, a bit confused about the user recruitment survey. This is new to me. Can you provide an example? Well, I suppose we just looked at one. So let's actually just dive into the module. Okay. So create a user survey that can be used during the user recruitment process. Note that your survey should help you weed out any users, will not reveal useful information about the user interface. So that's the point, is there's some questions that you need to try and figure out whether or not it's relevant or not. So for instance, if someone says, no, I never use the internet, and then they tell you, and then they answer 50 questions about what they think about your email client, then you're going to downrank the certainty factor on that research. It should also reveal information about who the user indicates why they're suitable users to include in the user test. Keep in mind everything you've learned about selection bias from drafting the survey. Yeah. So the survey, so the screener questions, the recruitment survey is a pre-survey that you're essentially asking to decide whether or not you should continue or not. So that program that I was showing you a little earlier, Typeform, where we were kind of going, okay, cool, we are just looking at a certain subset of the reports, we can use this ourselves to analyze and filter out that data and essentially go, okay, well, we don't want to know about anyone who has never had a gym membership, for instance, in this particular case, or someone who's never used a personal instructor or has used a personal instructor. So I think the thing here that we're really trying to achieve is you're trying to filter to determine the value of the data. So in your case, in your case of this module, I think that you're not going to be recruiting enough people. I really want to encourage people to think about using things like Facebook and Google to recruit people, because, I mean, that survey that I showed you, I think it's about 750 Rand, and we ended up getting 100, I mean, in Facebook advertising costs, and then obviously prizes. I think the whole thing came to about 2 grand. And we managed to get over 150 responses and fully completed surveys. So I think there's a lot of value to, I mean, people do fill in surveys, but you want to screen people out, because bearing in mind that once you get people into surveys because they want to win a competition. And so there are certain things that you need to do to ascertain, filtering questions, whether or not it's useful for that person to, it's about separating the signal from the noise. There's always going to be some noise in some survey collection. And so the screener is really about determining whether or not you really, want to find out those things and recruit whether or not those are the right people. So often what you would do is you maybe get a database of 10,000 people who are willing to enter into a survey, and you find the 700 who are actually going to be worthwhile gathering information from. But you need to be careful with that, because the danger there is that you lose people who potentially have got good value data, but they've then asked like some sort of yes/no question that takes them out. So generally what I do is I will include a single survey, and I'll have the screener questions up front, and I won't drop someone off from the screener. I will just use that in post-processing of the data. The thing is, there are some people, some market researchers will tell you that because of the cost of completing the survey is high, you want to drop the person off the screener as quickly as possible. But I feel if you use a competition mechanic as an incentive, then and you're doing research digitally, so the person's just filling something in online, then that's less of a problem. If you are trying to meet with the people one-on-one, then you definitely want to screen out earlier. So if you know that you're going to be doing a face-to-face or a lab set of research, then you don't want to bring someone in for that research if they're not needed. Does that help clarify a little bit? I can see here that some of you are saying it is clearing things up a little bit. So in short, user recruitment survey is about a screening survey to select users before spending the time with them. In the case of the course, obviously, you need to find 1 or 2 victims or research subjects for the week, and so you want to try and get that feedback to them as quickly as possible. All right, are there any other questions? Because otherwise, I think we're going to leave it at that. Otherwise, I suppose we could end up spending the whole day with me talking, but I think you should all get on with your weekends, enjoy them. Thank you all very much for your participation so far in the course. I think it's going really, really well. This is, as I said last week, one of the bigger courses that we've had, 60 plus, which is fantastic. And so yeah, I'm really enjoying these conversations, or call them conversations we're having. I'm going to try and find a way next week where we possibly find a way in which those of you who want to can also jump in, and we can ask some questions on video. I'm going to see whether or not we can't arrange something, but if not, we'll just continue to use the Hangout. It is a bit strange for me because I feel like I'm talking to myself, but I'm glad that this has been helpful for some of you. Cool. All right. I hope you all have a good rest of your Sunday, and thank you very much for your time.